Welcome to the Passion, Purpose, Power podcast. I'm your host, Ames. I'm a neurodivergent, fat, queer counsellor, coach and clinical supervisor, and I love stories. I love hearing your stories, I love sharing stories, and I love talking with people about their stories. In this podcast, I'm going to introduce you to interesting people with interesting stories to share about their passions, purpose, and power. If you love this podcast, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any amazing episodes, and come and find me on social media. I want to hear from you, and please share your stories with me. Welcome to this episode of the Passion, Purpose, Power podcast. I'm really excited to be joined by Victoria Oldman, who is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a few years now, and this is the best bit about having a podcast is I can just get all my friends on and have a lovely chat. It's wonderful. So I'm just going to introduce Victoria to you. Victoria is an engagement and development worker at the Clare Project in Hastings. Victoria is responsible for facilitating psychosocial support groups and workshops for the trans, non-binary and intersex community. In addition to this, Victoria also leads the delivery of TNBI awareness and inclusivity training to organisations in the public and private sector. Following an emotional vigil for murdered 16-year-old Brianna Gay in 2023, Victoria co-founded Trans Pride Hastings, the first official event of its kind, taking place over 8 days across Hastings, St Leonard's and Bexhill. This significant occasion offered 15 events that focused on community building, support and celebration, counteracting the toxic conversation about trans lives in the media. Hailed as a proactive educator of the LGBT+ community, this inspiring ambassador of trans rights shares positive experiences that enable and support others to be their true, authentic selves. Welcome, Victoria.
Hi.
How does it feel to have that read out?
Yeah, I think that's unusual. That's unusual, but I could probably get used to it if someone wanted to do that most days. It makes me sound very, very, very important, and I'm really not. But yeah, that was lovely. Thank you. This is Nigel, by the way. I should probably mention that.
I should have introduced those that are having the joy of watching this on the video, you'll see Nigel, who's the most affectionate cat.
It's outrageous.
But if you're just listening on audio, you won't get the joy of Nigel, so you'll have to just go and watch the video.
On the audio version, you might hear me sort of struggle every once in a while as claws get dug into my knee, or I lift a cat off my lap. It's worth explaining.
Amazing.
He's not
amazing. No, I'm very much enjoying having Nigel there as well. Well, so yeah. Let's start with passion. What are you passionate about, Victoria? What excites you? What kind of gets you out of bed in the morning? What would you say you are passionate about?
Gosh, so a few things. Some much smaller than others. I'm quite passionate about my my Fortnite profile at the moment on the Xbox, which is ridiculous. But the main thing, I suppose, is really it's supporting others around me, not just obviously I work within the sort of trans and non-binary community, and I think it would be very easy for me to say I'm passionate about trans rights, and of course I am. As a trans woman, I'm very passionate about those, but that's not what I do. I'm not sort of out there sort of really sort of fighting in a sort of activism led way. There are plenty of people doing that, and obviously more people are needed, but it's not sort of where I excel in my own space. What I like to do is sort of more ground level, I guess, support for those around me, because it benefits me too. I think that's the other thing. I think it's really difficult to separate that out. I think it's very difficult to be like completely selfless. I think if I told you, everything I do is for others, that'd be nonsense. So there's a really good sort of two-way tug there. I think that sort of helps us sort of get through this sort of quite difficult time at the moment, and drives me to sort of keep going forward. So that is really at the heart of sort of everything I do, from the work I do to sort of personal projects, and be those sort of like large scale on a over a series of months, or something very small just in an average day. So yeah, really it's just about sort of like support and making sure that we're all sort of getting through things as comfortably and as easily, I guess, as we can. And often that is through a lens of of those within my own community.
Yeah, yeah, no, I hear that. I hear that. And and this might be a massive question, but what I I don't want to assume the level of knowledge of anybody listening to this podcast. So can you tell me something about the landscape in which trans people and the LGBTQ plus community find themselves within at the minute in this country?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not the rosiest of conversations, I will say that.
Yeah,
We're in a difficult time at the moment. You know, I think things have been tricky for a long time, particularly for the trans and non-binary community. But it's really sort of ramped up in the last few years as the UK media really has sort of gone on a sort of real all-out attack on us. But I think coupling that, you've seen a lot of things happening in the States, and that's sort of inferred things over here. And just generally, the sort of discussion is quite negative. I hate the fact that there is a discussion. I hate the fact that I'm using words like discussion to describe people's lives. So I think whilst there are some really difficult things that are being sort of shown to us on a daily basis, you know, I think there was a front page news article only 2 days ago in the Daily Mail, of course, of all things. But when I see a headline and the first word is trans, I know it's not going to be trans woman is fantastic. So yeah, so that's quite difficult, and I think as a result of that, it's quite scary and quite anxiety inducing for anyone that is affected by that. And that's not just people within the community. I think everyone's affected by that. The sort of whole slant of everything that's going on within this space is all based around fear and panic, you know. And so actually what you've got people on all sides within the community and outside all going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I'm really scared. And actually it's not really anything to be scared of in terms of the existence of trans and non-binary and gender diverse folk. But actually on this side, we're sitting there thinking, are we okay? Is it safe for me to do the things that I want to do? Can I access the services that I need to access? And what does the future hold for me, just as a human being? So yeah, that's an incredibly condensed version of what's going on. But it's ultimately it's just not a great space in the wider sort of circles, I guess. I would like to think that sort of day to day, and certainly coming off the back of a lot of Pride events and trans Pride events that have been larger than they've ever been, I would hope that people are at least a little bit stronger, a little bit sort of more energized than they were sort of going into sort of June and July. Yeah, all of that, obviously, all the sort of Pride events and things that really sort of do give us that sort of strength and sort of sense of community. And that is really only a small part of everything. It is short-lived. It's not something that extends, you know, we talk about sort of companies sort of rainbow washing things and this idea of it being sort of all temporary, but actually on the other end, it really is. You know, after arranging Trans Pride Hastings this year, and that being, we did a week-long series of events for that. It ending was quite substantial. When you're like, oh, it's ended. It still ends. You know, whether it lasts a day, a week, or anything, it still has an ending point, and that's quite difficult to wrap your head around as well. It's something that should exist all year, and by having these sort of physical things that happen, these physical events that take place that bring us all together, is something that we can actually grab hold of, and it's harder to do that when it's not literally there. So it can be a bit tricky.
No, that's a really good summing up of a massive landscape of what's actually going on. And I hear that, you know, what you were saying there was sort of, I guess, the difference between perhaps, like, I don't know, frontline activism versus on the ground support for the people that really need that support. They're different things, and both really important. But
yeah, absolutely, and they do interact. You know, I think because quite often it's the people that are doing that sort of work that need the support as well themselves. You know, I think there's so much responsibility that comes onto the community to educate, to fight, to support each other, and to just exist anyway, that actually doing all those things, it's very difficult to do them all at once, if not impossible. And you can only do them for a certain amount of time. You know, throughout my sort of professional roles within sort of trans and non-binary environments, there is time limits. Actually recognizing that and going, actually, I don't think I can do that for much longer, because I need to switch to something else in order to allow my batteries to recharge, and also not to be the single voice in the conversation as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're able to find that kind of recharge space for you personally?
No. I think that's the short answer, is no. But I think it does. You do have to just sort of shift up the things that you do. I mean, you mentioned it briefly in my sort of bio at the top there, but like one of the things that I was doing for a long time was running support groups and facilitating drop-in centers and things like that, and that was the bulk of my work. And actually now this year I've started to move away from that. I still do some. I run a cooking therapy workshop twice a month in Brighton, which is just the most amazing thing. We can talk about it, but it's the most amazing thing ever. But that's kind of the only sort of real thing I do within that space now, sort of really sort of frontline sort of support within the community. And I've moved for this time to sort of be doing more training and speaking to people outside of the community and allies and those that want to learn, to try and it's a different battle, I suppose. But I think it's important to be able to do that sort of that moving away. So it certainly helped me to be able to. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily in nicer situations, because actually doing sort of training and talking to people on that level is it's very different. You get some very interesting things said, but it's outside of the sort of personal trauma. And I think that's the thing that was important to step away from for a bit. I will probably go back.
I think it's really human to acknowledge the fact that being in those spaces and giving that much to that kind of work is very rarely sustainable in the long term. You've got to be able to step in and out and have people, you know, shift around and take over, and you know, to have it be a bit more fluid, I guess. Otherwise you will burn out.
Yes, and we see it, you know, we see it happen. I also think there's a degree of sort of separation between those roles, and actually what I was getting into a situation where I just kind of needed to be around sort of my own tribe, as it were, without that being in a professional setting, you know, allow it to be a completely social setting, because that is a different relationship on all sides. So I think that was also important.
So tell me about the cooking therapy thing, because that sounds amazing. Tell me about it. What does that involve?
So it's wonderful. It's called Group Nourish, and it is run with the Clare Project, and it takes place in Brighton, and it's run by myself and a person called Serge, who is a therapist. And it is it's a cooking therapy workshop for trans, non-binary, and intersex people. We meet twice a month for approximately 5 hours. And what we do is we get into the community kitchen in Brighton, which is this incredible kitchen. You walk in and it's like the set of Ready, Steady, Cook, but multiplied. It's beautiful, and makes it very much easier. You certainly can do it in my kitchen. And we meet and we cook various things. It's not a cooking school. We don't tell people how to cook. I am not a cook. We all cook together. We decide on what we're going to cook the previous session, you know, for this one. We do people's own recipes, family things. We have guest chefs that come in, always from within the community. We've had Len Montgomery, who was on MasterChef, came in and cooked for us. So we do that. We prepare a lovely meal. We always do sort of vegan and gluten-free options as part of our set menu. And then we all sit down and we eat together, which is wonderful, around a nice big sort of, you know, family-like table. And then we spend a couple of hours just kind of sharing around the table, and that's the sort of really significant and lovely part of the experience. And then we do more washing up than I've ever seen in my life, and it's horrific. So the end of it is kind of like, oh, I don't, I come home and I just don't. You don't want to see how much washing up there is in my sink right now. It's because I just can't do it anymore. But it's a really wonderful experience, and it really helps that sort of having tasks to do whilst we're in that space. So it really brings the group together. It's sort of, we are all cooking, we're all sort of doing things that we maybe haven't always been comfortable to do, or we're learning new things, even though that's not the purpose of it. And that is what enables all of the sort of connection that happens. And it's a really wonderful group. It normally has about sort of 15 to 16 people each time in it. They drop in and drop out, so it sort of rotates quite a lot. We've been doing it for 18 months now, and are about to apply for some more funding, and it's wonderful. It's the most wholesome thing I've ever done, and we eat very well, which is also a very nice thing to do. So I honestly can't fault it. It's fabulous.
And what a perfect name, because that just sounds so nourishing. Like just the community, the act of cooking and working with food, and then the eating and the talking part of it just sounds, I don't know, like some Walton Mountain style.
Honestly, it really is, and it's really lovely. And I think you can really sort of see the benefit. People get different things out of it. So the cooking experience is one thing. And it's really nice to, as anyone will say, it's really lovely to just create something, and for it to be delicious at the end is also great. But also that sort of dining setting is also very very wonderful in that that's not something we all have access to. It's not something that everyone has experienced in their lives, and it really does sort of bring everyone together. And it's a really lovely group. It's quite it's got quite a large uptake of sort of neurodivergent folk that come to it. Whilst that wasn't necessarily how it was started, that's kind of where it's sort of ended up at this point. And we just have we have really wonderful, sort of very relaxed sort of time together. And I think that's the important part of it. There isn't really any pressure. There's no shortage, certainly in Brighton at the moment, with things that the Clare Project do and Trans Pride Brighton and the Ledwood Centre and things. There's no shortage of spaces, and places like the Query as well. There's no shortage of spaces for drop-ins for gender expansive people to go and hang out. But actually what you're starting to see now is things for people to do, and that's where sort of Nourish sort of steps in, and there's all sorts of activities like that, which is really wonderful. I think it really sort of engages people in a way that other things can't.
It adds a different energy, I suppose, to a thing to do and create and be, as opposed to drop-ins, which are also great but different.
Absolutely. And it makes sure everyone's fed, and it's really we always have food in abundance. People always leave with little goodie bags to take away and things. So it's really lovely. And we don't make anything, I should stress, we're not making anything super complex. We're not doing radical sort of dining options, but we are sort of doing nice and wholesome things, and we theme things as well. So at Halloween we normally do a really nice sort of sort of autumn sort of blowout of nice sort of warming things, lots of soups and pies and stuff, which is great. And we do a big Hanukkah session as well towards the end of the year. It's the best thing I think I've ever done. I love it so much.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I kind of want to ask about Trans Pride Hastings, and I want to ask more about the training that you do, because I think that from some of the things that you told me about that before, there's some really interesting stuff going on there, particularly among GPs and healthcare services and that kind of thing. So let's start there, and then we'll come to Trans Pride Hastings. So tell us a little bit about the training and stuff you do.
Sure. So in my role at the Clare Project, I am now technically the training lead. I have led on all of our sort of trans, non-binary and intersex awareness training that we've been delivering for the last few years. And it takes place in really sort of a number of different ways. One of the more sort of substantial, I suppose, and significant projects that I've been working on for the last. I always, at this point, I'm like, I can never remember how long anything's been going on for. I think ever since COVID, it's like everything feels like it was a year ago, but it was probably 4 years ago.
Yes.
So I'm going to say 18 months. Let's say that to just be conservative. I've been working on a project with the NHS and the local commissioning services to train GPs and GP practices across Sussex in trans, non-binary and intersex awareness. And it's a two-part piece of training. So part A is normally led by myself, which is all about sort of community awareness, having all members of staff within those clinical settings and primary care settings to better understand the needs and experiences of those certain parts of the community. And then also with a look at what can we do to be better at sort of serving them, really. So how can we better listen to their needs? How can we understand where they're coming from, and what are the things within normally what are quite antiquated systems to just sort of alleviate that. I mean, obviously, a lot of the people that are coming along are going, yeah, our systems are terrible and we can't change them. So what is it that we can do to sort of work around those hurdles? And then there's a part B to the training, which is normally led by Wellbeing in Brighton, which is a clinical side of things, which more actively goes into how can GPs look at providing bridging hormones and intermediary care for people on waiting lists. So it's a really wonderful piece of work. It's all funded by the NHS, so the people that are attending are paid to go there, which means they show up, and I'm paid to be there to talk to them, so that means I show up, and it all kind of works for everyone. It's a bit tricksy at times, GPs aren't known for their sort of warm, engaging nature. So sometimes I'm literally just talking to a room full of blank faces, blank screens on Zoom. But for the most part, people are really engaged, and it's a really wonderful thing to do. I haven't got the stats to hand, but I think we've trained, I think it's 147 staff, I think, across the last year, and it's open to everyone across Sussex, and it's every member of staff within those GP settings. So it's everything from the doctors to the frontline staff, to the receptionists, to the nurses, to pharmacists, everyone that could come in contact with someone, and it's really beneficial. It's a really wonderful thing to do, and I'm thrilled that it's continued. So I've just recently booked in the next 3 months worth of that, and I don't see it sort of slowing down anytime soon. And it's one of those things that I think now we've been doing long enough that I've been able to actively see some of the results of it. I've heard of experiences of people having better times with their doctors, and I'm now very confident in being able to assist someone with those issues. It's no surprise to me when I speak to a trans or non-binary person and they're having issues with a doctor. That's quite a common thing, either because they don't necessarily know what to ask for, and there is this sort of real pressure on the individual to know exactly what it is they need and what they're entitled to and how they can get it, and all of these things. And so to actually now be in a position where I think actually I can actively assist you with that, or if not, I can certainly point the GPs into an area where they can get the assistance that they need to be better understanding. So that's wonderful. That's a really large part of what I've been doing. On top of that, I deliver similar training, however, not as focused around primary care settings, to just voluntary sector community organisations. So that could be absolutely anyone. We've worked very closely with Survivors Network, and Possibility People, and all sorts of different organizations, and that's wonderful. That's we do it, we charge for it. Obviously, it's one of the income generating things that we can do as a charity, but we also do open up free sessions for people to come along and sort of better themselves. We also have a very sliding scale of cost, I think, which is very important, so we're not I'm a big fan of that in everything that I do, is that there isn't sort of a fixed price. We are looking at people's circumstances in order to better suit their needs, in order to get what is very important to be done. I'm always very thankful if I get to go in and speak to anyone about any of this stuff, because it's not something that doesn't benefit all of us. It's important to be able to get there. But that's something, I've been doing now for, I was doing it on the side of my sort of previous work. So whilst I was running sort of drop-ins and things like that, on the side, I was like, actually, let's go and do a little bit of training here, a little bit of training there. And now it's sort of just bled into this idea of, there's so much thirst for it. We're falling over ourselves with people wanting to try and understand things better. So that's now my pure focus. And it's really interesting how things change as well over the time that we've been doing it. You know, I'm no longer sitting in a room of people trying to explain to them what a pronoun is. But not too long ago, that's exactly where we were at, you know, and people going, I just don't understand they, them pronouns. And I'm thrilled that that's not a conversation I'm sort of wasting as much time on. So, but it's funny how those things sort of do sort of shift and move. But a really wonderful thing to do. And really, I find it, I quite like the challenge of it. I quite often going into spaces where maybe things aren't going to be the nicest of environments. And whilst I'm lucky that I'm very well supported through work, and in any of those settings, if anything were to sort of go into an area that we weren't comfortable with, we would just end it. But I do quite like that. I quite enjoy that sort of. I find it very difficult for people to be challenging, I suppose, when you're in front of them. I think that's often that sort of diffuses things. And I'm lovely, so I just sort of that's what comes across and diffuses any situation. No, it's very interesting. I do get some interesting questions, but that's kind of, to me, that's kind of the purpose of it. I feel like there's so much of the sort of unpleasantness that arrives is not intentional. There is, don't get me wrong, there is intentional sort of hate out there, but I think there's a lot of just a lack of understanding, a fear of getting something wrong, a fear of consequences that maybe aren't the actual consequences, you know, with this sort of idea of being cancelled or having people turn on you or being called a bigot or something like that. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of instances where I think, let's cancel someone and let's call them a bigot. But that's not the approach for every situation. So I'd like to be able to create spaces where people can ask the questions that they maybe were unsure about doing, and try and be sort of calm about it, and understanding that maybe won't come out the way that I would like to hear, let alone what they mean. So it's an interesting one, but it's you never really know what you're going to get.
Well, your passion for that comes across. You know, the I guess the excitement, the challenge of some of that, but just how needed it is, and to hear that there's still a demand and a need. You know, there's still more people, you know, that need to have this training. I guess, I mean, it'd be. Do you know if there's anything that's sort of rolling out in terms of the primary care setting training more, not internationally, more nationally?
I think there are, there's definitely sort of other sort of areas where people are looking into things, but I think because of what the LCS has been doing sort of here, it's much more structured. So it's just kind of being offered at a grander scale. But I think otherwise there are people sort of seeking things out. I think there is a drive for individual practices to be going, actually, we would like to better understand this, or we would like to get better at doing this. I think actually that's something we're seeing across the board in a lot of areas, is people thinking, well, maybe we were good at this, but do we need to be able to show that we want to be better, and therefore are approaching organizations for training, but also realizing that this isn't just a situation that they're coming into contact with because of the people they serve, be it patients, be it customers, be it anything. It's their staff, it's their own families, it's their own friends. And so it only really takes sort of one person to have contact and then they do become, I think, a very passionate sort of ally in that respect, and then can push for change themselves. And I think I see that quite a lot. It's very unusual for me to go into a setting now, and I'm not. I used to. It sounds so ridiculous now, but I feel like I used to early on ask questions in training sessions. I'd be like, "Does anyone know a trans person?"
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's a ridiculous question I haven't even dreamed to ask now. And almost every single time someone actually volunteers some information about a partner or a friend or a loved one. But it's such a sort of reductive question to ask. And also, you may have no idea. But it's we definitely see sort of a change, I think a sweeping change in that, which is positive. I think. And I think it's really easy to talk about things like they are all negative and everything is sliding downhill. But I also think it's really easy to talk about things in the other way and go, well, that's really positive. And the answer and the actuality of it is it's neither of those things, and it's both those things. There are people having really awful experiences in so many areas, and there is a lot of joy and support and love also out there. So, but it's not one person's experience is not consistent with another's at all. Even in a very small box, people can be right next to each other in the same town, going to the same areas and having just wildly different experiences. And I think that's really important to recognize.
And I think that's so important, because it is another side to the trans and non-binary story that you wouldn't hear if you only focused on what was presented in the media. I think that's important, because I know from conversations that I've had with trans and non-binary people that if you only focus on that, or if it can feel overwhelming. And it's not to say that the positive cancels out the negative, but it's so important to hear those positive stories as well, and
absolutely
that there are people that want this training and want to learn and want to change and want to grow in their understanding of gender.
And I think it's very important to sort of seek out the good as well. I think it's very easy to sort of get absorbed into negative things. There was a really interesting YouGov poll that came out in the last week or so, which had lots of stats in it, but it was particularly it was a survey amongst LGBT people about LGBT people, which was really interesting, and it just showed a couple of key factors that I think people wouldn't necessarily be aware of. And one was that sort of cisgender queer people are overwhelmingly positively supporting trans people, which if you listen to the media, you might hear the complete opposite. In particular, cisgender lesbians were the most sort of in favor of trans folk. And I think actually there's a narrative out there that says that's not the case. But on top of that, there was a really interesting question, which was asking queer people to, it was one asking them how they felt about each sort of part of the LGBT umbrella, but also it was asking them what they thought the public thought of those people. And there was a really interesting study in that overwhelmingly, everyone really loved trans people. Why wouldn't they? But when asked what do they think the general public thinks of trans people, oh my gosh, overwhelmingly negative. And it really shows that sort of level of spin there that the media has on that, because looking at it from the outside, you would think, that's, we don't like these. But actually, when you ask people directly, they're like, of course they do. It's ridiculous. So I think it is very important to then talk to people directly, It seems ridiculous for me to be sort of sitting here screaming fake news after everything we've been through for the last, sort of 5 or 6 years. But there is, there's massive elements of that, particularly within this space. And it's easy to forget when you're reading text on a page that we're talking about people that you can speak to, people that you could interact with, people that you are interacting with, people that are, scanning your shopping in the supermarket, or performing operations in hospitals, and doing all the things that all other people do. So they are just people out there. Don't shouldn't be reading too much about anyone on a page.
And I just want people to really be able to think critically about the things that they are reading, because if you're seeing something that says trans people no longer want cis people to be able to use the word mother, that's not happening. So
Sure.
really, please think critically about some of these headlines that you might be reading, because it's
Yeah, I
nonsense.
think for the most part, if it seems bonkers, it might be bonkers, you know. And I think, and people aren't, you know, people aren't that unreasonable or that sort of like
Yeah,
out there.
yeah,
And yeah, but it's there's some wild stories that go around that get picked up in this sort of desperate um you know, chasing of clicks and
yeah,
of power in that space, you know. And it's always
yeah,
going to be the most outrageous stories that generate that level of
yeah.
interest. You know, this idea of sort of like, what was it? What was the thing about the children in schools using litter boxes because they're identifying as cats and things? And you're like,
Oh God.
yeah, it's of course a really juicy story. It's as juicy a story as UFOs or the Loch Ness monster, but it's as real as those things also. You know, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
of course those things are going to be bonkers.
yeah,
But really, you know, I don't know. It's a wild sort of a wild situation. Really, what you've got is you've got a bunch of people just asking for better healthcare and legal
yeah.
protection in the spaces that they need to access um, in order to just sort of safely go on with their lives.
Mm,
It really doesn't come down to any more than that.
yeah. So important to remember. Okay, so a little bit about Trans Pride. How did that? So you co-founded Trans Pride
Mm,
Hastings, and you have it's like 15 events over 8 days, and it seems to have gone incredibly well. So yeah, tell me a
yeah.
little bit about how that all came about.
Well, first of all, I guess what I would say to you is if someone comes to you at any point in your life and says, let's start a Pride event, just think very long and hard about what that entails and whether that's something you want to enter into. Um, yeah, very lucky. So you mentioned it at the top, but after the vigil that I'd arranged for Brianna back in February, I was really startled by the level of support that actually I saw in my hometown for the community. Um, Sadly, as a trans person, it is not unusual for us to hold vigils. It's something I do one every year for Trans Day of Remembrance, but also there are times throughout the year where we may need to do that.
Mm,
Um, and they're not pleasant. It's not a fun thing, obviously, to do. And usually, I'm sort of sat there, certainly in my hometown, and I'm waiting for, you know, the dozen trans people just sort of turn up, and we'll sit there and have a reading, light a candle, and sort of mope off. It's not very nice.
mm,
However, with this situation with Brianna in February, and I realized that was obviously that was a horrific moment. You know, Brianna's murder um, was just unbelievable. And I think because she was a young person, and also it was the murder was committed by young people as well. That puts a level of responsibility beyond those people. That's on us as a society. That is on the media. That is on everything that we do. There aren't there aren't kids just coming up in that space. They're
mm,
being influenced.
yeah,
So yeah, so it was a very emotive sort of setting. And I think as a member of the trans community, we'd seen that coming for a long time. You know, it was sort of like, this is where we're heading, this is where it's
mm,
going to start to go. And then suddenly it happened. So we arranged this vigil, and to my surprise, 150 people turned up.
wow,
And that was really startling. And it was really lovely. It's a really lovely moment. With both an enormous amount of people from within the community, but also allies from outside. And it was at that moment that Zed Gregory, the my co-organizer and co-founder of Trans Pride Hastings, we knew each other sort of briefly a little bit before. We'd met in tattoo parlors and various other things and sort of crossed over. But it was at that event that actually we started talking about maybe there's more we can do here. Maybe there's something
mm,
we can start to think about. And we started to meet then on a sort of weekly basis to be like, what could we do? Is there a space for a Pride event? Is there enough to support a Pride event in what is a smallish town? And on the 31st of March for Trans Day of Visibility, we announced that we were arranging Trans Pride Hastings. So flash forward from that 3 months or whatever it was from March to July, and it happened. We had Trans Pride Hastings, first one of its kind this year. It was an 8-day long event. From the 22nd, Saturday the 22nd of July up until the 29th, 15 separate events across the town, but also neighbouring towns. We started off in Bexhill as well, so we didn't just, it was really important that we didn't just concentrate in Hastings and St Leonard's. And we tried to do free events based around sort of community and sort of bringing people together, engaging the town, engaging the support that we knew was there. Whilst offering something for absolutely everybody for free to sort of bring people together. And it was, I'm really happy to say it was an overwhelming success. It was, it was an incredible thing. I think I'm still looking at it this point. I'm struggling to look back at it and going, gosh, we did that, because there's been a lot of strange things that said throughout that week. Times where we were speaking on stage at various events and things, and people would be like, and here's Victoria and Zed, founders of Trans Pride Hastings. And I'm thinking, that's not what the setting is. Like, we're not Trans Pride Hastings, but all of us were Trans Pride Hastings and are. And really all Zed and I did was push a boulder off a hill. We joined some dots up. The rest just kind of happened. But we were very lucky with how it happened. And I think we had some very clear goals for what we wanted to achieve with it. Obviously, it's slightly unusual to do a Pride event that lasts 8 days and not a single day. But that was very intentional. It was very important to me that it wasn't something that just came and went in a day. It could be missed. That could be, for whatever reason, could be rained off. And I wanted to have a bit of a sort of town takeover. I wanted people to know. We were really aware of, as we are when we look at any sort of statistics of the population, or when we held that vigil, or just in my own experience, I'm aware that there is support out there. It's just silent. Just a lot of it is ever so silent. And so what I really wanted to do is just make that audible and make it visible. And I think we really managed to do that. I think we did a really good job at getting local businesses involved and getting them sort of show that they were in support of the community, whilst at the same time providing a series of spaces and activities that people within the community and outside of, there was some mixing there as well, could do things to bring each other together. I wanted people to come into that week in one place and leave in a better place. That was the whole goal. Meet someone on day one at a tattoo event or a life drawing event, and then by the last event, which was a big beach picnic, see those people again and have formed friendships, or to understand that you're not in quite as small of a bubble as you were, or that it's safe to sort of widen your walls a little bit, and experience this sort of love and joy that was there. And the town was beautiful. The town really got behind it too, which is great. So we had trans flags over the town hall and over a couple of other council buildings. The lifeguards put up a trans flag amongst theirs. And we have there's along the promenade on the seafront, there's a place called Bottle Alley, which is a big sort of walkway that's very long, going from the pier to St Leonard's. And it has lights all the way through it, and they lit those up in Trans Pride colours for the entire week as well. So it was a real sort of visible thing, sort of effort to show support and to make a safe and sort of welcoming experience and area. And my whole goal was to just get more queer people into Hastings. Like, come here. So, and I think we achieved that. I think I think there was so much that I got out of it that I don't take from other Trans Pride events, and it's only because of the nature of the format. it's lovely to have a big, wonderful day out that feels, well, first of all, has a very prominent march, like we have in Brighton.
Yes.
That is very important. That is significant. That does feel like a riot. That does feel like 30,000 angry people going, I need things
Yes.
to be better. We
Yeah.
need to do this. And that's vitally important. And we didn't do a march this year in Hastings. It didn't feel like it was the right thing for us to do with being at a smaller scale in our first year. It didn't feel like that was the right thing to do in terms of
Okay.
how could we offer the level of safety and protection that we would want to those individuals. We can never, I think we've, over time in a lot of areas, people have gotten used to saying this is a safe space. And I think actually it's very difficult to promise that.
Yeah.
So instead what we did was we paid to take people from Hastings over to Brighton, and we marched in the big Brighton march.
Right.
So that was fantastic. But I think that setting of having a big march, which I think is very important, and then having a single day of joy, it does sort of leave you as sort of like, it feels a bit like a day out.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but the next day it's gone. And I really loved the idea that we had just something to do today, and then tomorrow I'm looking forward to this, and then there's 2 things tomorrow, and then I'm going skating on Thursday, I've got a party on Friday, and it's a picnic on Saturday, all of these things. And it just it was beautiful, and every single event became my favorite one as the week progressed. And there was it was just the most beautiful thing I've seen. Like I'm bowled over with how well it went.
And no wonder there's been a bit of a come down that sort of feels more empty, I guess, of after such a I mean, the way that you describe it just sounds so important, that you had the forethought to have it over an extended period of time. And I don't think it can be underestimated just how important an event or events like that are to the trans community when they're feeling shit and when they are in a really low place. Maybe at that point they can go, yeah, but there was that business that joined in that event, and there were people there, like, you've made the silent support loud, you've made the invisible support visible, and that can't be underestimated, the impact that's going to have on someone's mental health at a time when they might really need it.
I went into this week, even as someone who's organized a lot of it, I still went into it thinking I can count all of the trans people in this town on my hands and feet, and then sort of come out of it going, oh my gosh, I need a dozen more hands and feet, because it's so much. There's so much more there than I was aware of, and seeing people going, I didn't realize. The stories we kept doing was, I didn't realize this was here. I didn't realize that these people were here. I didn't realize that I was accepted in this way, or these spaces were okay for me. And that was incredible. So just
I mean,
mind-blowing.
Talk about history making, though, and I know that you're deflecting some of that. People were introducing me as the founder, but you co-founded a history making series of events that just, well, like I said, highlights perhaps the safety that people didn't realize was there before. That's a history making event.
It was cool. It was cool, and I still maintain I've never felt safer in my own town. We're very fortunate that throughout everything we've worked very closely with the Trans Pride UK collective, which is a newly formed in February, sort of collective of all the trans prides that take place across the UK. And so we meet regularly. We all share knowledge and resources throughout that, which is really helpful. And we also coordinate. So it's brilliant having 14, 15 different trans prides that are taking place, but it's no good if they all take place on the same weekend. So we try and sort of spread them out, so you really do get a sort of series of a few weeks where there's just something going on all the time.
So we've talked about so much, and there's still other things I want to ask you, but do you, when we think about purpose, I mean, a lot of the things that you are talking about that you're involved in sound so meaningful. Do you relate to the word purpose? Can you kind of say, yes, this is something that gives me purpose?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really, yeah, it's a tricky one. So my idea of purpose, I think, was so very much attached to my own experience of my own identity and transition and coming out and all of this. In that gave me an additional purpose, sort of on a very personal level. I now had a reason to continue on to, I think I can look at myself personally and go and look at my life and go, there's almost two halves. There's a half where I didn't really care too much because things didn't sort of fit or work in the way that they should. And then there's the half I'm in now where I really do care quite strongly about that. Because and so from that I get this other purpose of actually that's true to myself, that is sort of like actually look after yourself, enjoy things, experience as much as possible, live in the very sort of essence of what I think that word's supposed to mean. So I think I have a responsibility to myself to get the most out of my own life now, is particularly as I feel like I was on the back foot because of transitioning later in life and sort of thinking, actually, there's a bunch of time that I can't get back. And so let's maximize the time that we've got. If anyone is better off at the end of anything that I've ever been a part of, including myself, job done. That's kind of it, and how we measure being better off, it's really important, I guess. It's did someone enjoy themselves for a moment? Did someone forget about something difficult for a moment? I feel like nowadays in my life there's less choices. I'm making less choices. I'm doing things. I'm just kind of doing things because I feel like they need to happen. I'm not. It's not. I'm fortunate enough to be. The things that I want to do are very significant and important to me personally, and that's not because I'm doing them because they're important to me.
Yeah.
I'm just doing them and they're important to me. So because they're important to me for reasons for things that I didn't choose.
Yeah.
Like my own personal set of circumstances related to my gender, for example. I didn't pick those. We're all just sort of trying to do our best, I think. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I don't know what my purpose is.
No, and I think that's also okay, and like you say, just things within just existing have purpose, and it's an interesting question. Tell me a little bit about the creation of My Gender Rules, because I'm intrigued.
Oh gosh, yes, So My Gender Rules is my little funky. I've actually got all of the stuff right in front of me, which seems way too planned.
I promise it wasn't planned.
So My Gender Rules is my sort of queer brand of affirming affirming LGBT, affirming apparel and ephemera. I like to think of it as, I guess. So it started off really with attending Pride events and me going, I want a badge to wear. And there's a million badges at Pride events. You get them everywhere. They're always pronoun badges, or they say, queer joy or something. That it's all great. I all love it, but I've got a million of them. And I wanted something that was more specific to me. So I started to come up with my own sort of set of badges. And these were all sorts of things. Let me see if I've got some examples of some of the designs. I think the first one I ever did, these are just little cards that have got the designs on them. The first one I ever did said proud queer. And I thought, that's me. I'll wear a badge that says proud queer. In fact, this one had the full set of it. Protect trans kids was the other one that was really important at the time. And I started to work on these little slogans, I guess, that I thought would be good for badges that express the things that I wanted to express that weren't already out there in typical LGBTQIA plus badge material. I wasn't interested in seeing things saying love is love, and and pronoun stuff. I had enough of that. But because of the people that I was around, people in the community and the people I supported, I decided to talk to them and sort of look at what would they want if they wanted things. And that I very quickly got a lot of feedback that was very specific, that people wanted to sort of better represent themselves. At the neurodivergent group that I used to help work at, they really, really wanted a badge that just said, "Tell me if you're flirting." And it was like, that's brilliant.
Amazing.
I'll do
Yes.
that, and so every single one of my badges was really inspired by people I know. I've got one that says Tall Girl Club, and I'll give you some of the examples. Queer Beast, HRT of Darkness, I love that one. Them Fatale, Stuff Your Phase, yeah, and all sorts of like just little queer sort of like affirming mantras, and they would just sell them in little packs of four badges. And we later went on and ended up doing prints. I did a wonderful print that just says "The coast is queer," which was really great, which was really, really popular around sort of obviously living by the seaside. And the most popular thing I ever did was a bag. I made a tote bag that just said "Into Weird Shit." And it was it was so adopted by so many people inside and outside of the community. But the real purpose for all of this was to raise money. And as I said, sort of starting it out, I just wanted some fun things to represent how I was feeling and to better sort of show off who I was. And I very quickly, in making these little badges or making these, got those. So the ability to then sell them meant I didn't need anything. I didn't need to make anything from them, because really what I got out of it was I got my cool badge.
Yeah.
So then the brand just turned into a thing where it was like everything that we make, all of the funds being driven for it would go into a bursary fund that would then go straight back out to the local community or areas that I could fundraise for. So this year, all of the funding from My Gender Rules went into Trans Pride Hastings to directly support that. But prior to that, it had gone into a fund just so that I used to be a trustee of a local LGBT charity here. And we did have some funds within that charity to support those that needed it if people wanted to go and do something and they couldn't. But I always hated the fact, and I'm not going to talk too much about the charity, but I always hated the fact that when those scenarios presented themselves, when someone did require something that needed money, there was this awful sort of, or it was awful as far as I was concerned, this decision-making process of how vulnerable is this person, how poor is this person, how much do they need, whatever it is, and they try and be this, as there always will be when money's involved, the sort of like decision-making process that I felt I had no right to be a part of. As someone working there, I was involved in that process, but I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy that. And so My Gender Rules was then the funding aspect of that was starting to just create a fund that went, it doesn't matter. I don't care what your background is. I don't care whether you've got money in the bank. I don't care whether obviously I do care about all these things, but it doesn't matter how vulnerable you are or anything. If people need it, we'll just be able to do it. And it always went into sort of lovely things. I think we went with the local groups around here. We went for some meals one time, or we went to the theatre, and it just allowed us to just pay for it all without there being any sort of concern in that. And so it's just kind of spiraled from that. The badges were always super successful. I always get absolutely hounded wherever I go with them. I've always got them on me. Just a really lovely sort of wholesome thing. But it was born out of me going, I would quite like a badge that says respect my pronouns and ask me out. And so, or a very popular one just says not all authors are TERFs. Which I think is important to remember. So I mean, make stickers. I'd make stickers that would go everywhere that people may have seen on their travels. Fab ones that just say gender punk, or the coast is queer, clicking on queer shit. and they're not all sort of trans related. So, you know, a sticker that says a good spot to be gay. We've got ones that say girl on girl power. Oh, you know, all sorts of things that are sort of represented just because that's, you know, that's what I want.
And where can people go and buy your My Gender Rules stuff?
Yeah, so you can go to the website. The website is just mygenderrules.com online, or you can find us on Instagram as well at mygenderrules. Everything's always there. Actually, something I do want to call out with regards to My Gender Rules, I did make one ally badge, which is just a single. So I sell the little packs of 4 badges. They're £5 for a pack. They're all very lovely. But I do sell an ally badge as well. That is a little green badge that says ally without question on it, and it is £10.
Nice. Oh, I love that. I love that.
Because
Yes.
it's very important. I think, you know, it's sort of like, it's very easy to buy. You can go on Amazon and buy a t-shirt that says you're an ally. I wouldn't advise it.
Yeah.
But actually the badge means nothing. It's the donation that does. And my website is cheeky enough to at checkout say, would you like to pay double? And I'm very happy to report, and it's something that I would recommend anyone else do, that every single person that's bought an ally badge from My Gender Rules has paid £20, which makes me want to put an option on it, say, would you like to pay triple? But I probably won't push it that far. But I really support that. I think it's sort of like when people ask, what can I do to be a better ally? How can I help? And there is, you know, there's lots of things you can answer that with, of being of educating yourself, of looking at resources, of not relying on the trans, non-binary, and intersex individuals in your life to do that for you. You can do that, of course. But if you really want a simple way, just put your hand in your pocket. You know, donate to someone's crowdfunder or give to a charity that's supporting them. That is a really simple way of doing it. Go to these local small businesses and creators that are out there. There's plenty of them, and just support them with something. It does make a real big difference. It seems silly because I think maybe we're used to it in other areas of our lives of being sort of precious over money and being careful with those things around that. But actually within these sort of spaces, that can make a real sort of big difference. And I would say to those on the other side, ask. You know, don't be afraid to ask for help in those things. Certainly when we were looking at fundraising for Trans Pride Hastings, we were really minimal at first. We were really sort of like, look, come on, if you can give us a tenner, it'll really help. It'll, you know, I can put that to this, and then we'll have £20, and then that'll really help. And then by the end, I was sort of going into places and going, if you got 500 quid that you can give us, because that will make this one space so much better for 30 people. And people were doing that when they could. And sometimes it's because they haven't got the time or the capacity or the understanding necessarily to do more than that, but they are able to. And not everyone's able to. Obviously, that's understandable. We're all squeezed at the moment. Yeah, I don't think anyone is squeezed more than these minority groups. So I think it's something that we could certainly do. And it just makes a huge impact, more than anyone would realize.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. So finally, let's talk about power. And I think, you know, there's a thread of that throughout, just talking about LGBT, trans, non-binary, intersex people anyway. So I'm interested in what kind of comes up for you when you think about power, but I kind of want to ask really mostly what makes you feel powerful. I think that's a more interesting question.
Crumbs. Okay, what makes me feel powerful? I'm not sure. I very often do feel powerful. So, well, I mean, the obvious answer would be eyeliner, but it wouldn't be the most sort of serious of answers.
No, I love that.
What makes me feel powerful? I guess a lot of it is to do with sort of going outside of those areas where I feel the most sort of comfortable, I suppose. again, it's double-edged. And then being okay, I think is the sort of like, that's the kicker on it. It's sort of like, it's one thing to sort of, like I say, I don't often feel powerful. I think I live in a space where quite often I'm terrified of doing things.
Yeah.
And so there are regular moments where I get into situations and spaces that are very mundane, and I suddenly think, well done. But actually, each time that those are okay, then it does give you an additional sort of feeling of sort of strength and power in your own sort of space, in your own sort of self. So there were elements of it that were just sort of like, just feel powerful and just getting out there every single day and doing things, and not sort of succumbing to some of the negativity that I can see that's out there. But that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that I'm impervious to any of it that does come my way, and I do have wobbles all the time. But I think I should feel sort of some of that power in just being able to sort of do things. Which seems, when I say it, it seems sort of like, it seems quite sad, and I don't mean it to be sad, because it's not. But you know, there's not a day that goes by. It's been, you know, my own experience with my own gender and sort of my transition is now a long-winded one. I'm no longer talking like something that I did yesterday, or you know, in terms of coming out and stuff. But it hasn't stopped. It's never stopped. It hasn't sort of altered in any way throughout that. It's something that's just a very ongoing understanding that shifts and changes and things like that. And so I think just being able to sort of walk my own walk in terms of that is what gives me a great deal of feeling of sort of like power and strength in just who I am, and sort of this sort of commitment to understanding myself in a way that I think most people typically don't look at. Them sort of most cisgender people don't really ever look at and sort of examine and discuss in a way that trans people often do. And I never thought I would, sort of starting out. I think I had a really decent understanding of my own experience and identity when I first began exploring that. And actually what I've learned is that, no, of course I didn't, not at all. It's all of it's nonsense. So there's an enlightenment that comes with that, which feels really powerful. But it's also very personal and very isolated in that respect. It's not something that I think is transferable. I can tell people a little bit of what I'm trying to convey, but I can't even convey it in a very easy way. Even then, it is literally limited to myself. So it's like an incredible form of energy that can't affect in any sort of real capacity anything else. Which is, I guess, that's probably what makes it so great and what makes it so sort of safe in that respect. Because if it could impact others, then there's a mass amount of responsibility that comes with that. So I think just sort of like living my own truth, and by that, and I think it's really easy to sort of take that to mean, oh, you mean like being who you are because you're trans. I don't really mean that. Like, me being me is not my truth, but actually my actions on a daily basis, the decisions I make, the things I do, that is my truth. That is the choices and the things that I'm doing. And so much of that isn't connected to me being trans. But there was a time when it was. You know, there was a time when actually looking forwards, understanding and involving sort of who I am was a very big part of me getting to a place where I could start living my truth. But actually, now that that's kind of done, now that I've sort of stepped onto that conveyor belt, or whatever you want to think of it as, it's much more expansive. It's much more beyond that. But yes, but other than that, I'm not very powerful at all. I don't feel powerful.
I think I'm going to continue to unapologetically ask that question, because I think it's challenging, because we don't often think about our own power. We can. I heard someone on Instagram talking about how we often talk about female empowerment, but we don't often hear women talking about how they feel powerful. And so I think asking the question gets people to think about owning their power and what that might look like. And so I know that that might not necessarily be something that you've thought about, or anyone that I'm asking this question to has got a very succinct answer to this question. But I love the thought process that is happening when I'm asking the question, and people are starting to go, oh, okay, yeah, what is power? Because it's one of those words that has double edges for sure. And so
someone's going to shock you. Someone's going to pick up a remote control and go, wow, if I press this button, and you'll be, world of chaos. But yeah, it is an interesting thing. I think it does, and it does involve people accepting a certain degree of I don't know, understanding for their own sort of worth as well.
Yes,
worth
and confidence.
Impact.
Yes.
And we're all very good at going, no.
Yes.
As well as taking out any sort of idea of not taking up any sort of real sort of substantial space.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting. I talked to a friend recently about just dating nonsense, just absolute dating nonsense, and they were about to start a new relationship with someone who was a woman. They've never dated a woman before, and it would have put them in a visibly queer, for want of a better word, lesbian relationship. And they're really nervous about that. And we were talking a little bit about it because it's a really interesting thing. I think, I myself, my partner is a woman, and I hadn't anticipated getting into a relationship with a woman before her. But there was an interesting sort of like reshift of things. There's a degree of power that comes with this, is what I'm trying to get at, is that looking at sort of LGBTQIA plus spaces and going, actually, I'm part of this community, but I'm part of this community because I'm trans, and understanding the differences within that umbrella that encompasses us all for a myriad of reasons, but largely the fact that we've like all been, sort of left out by society in some way, or pathologized in some way, and things like that. But understanding that, lesbian, gay, and bisexual and things are very different. Their sexualities versus, trans and intersex and binary and stuff. So to suddenly find yourself sort of identifying with another aspect of that sort of umbrella is both daunting in some ways. It gives you another sort of visible, if you look at it in the way that the media would maybe want to, it's maybe another visible target. So now I'm thinking, gosh, okay, so I'm walking down the street as a trans woman, but I'm also walking down the street in what is being perceived as a lesbian couple, and that gives something else. But also there's a degree of like extra strength that comes from that, and now, and to be able to do that with another individual as well is a huge part of that. So now I look at a pride flag, for example, and it means something different to me. And I've got this other world that has kind of opened up a little bit. And I get to do that with my partner and engage with her on that. And so there's this real sort of sense of, I guess what I'm getting at is this sort of tribal, like communal group protection, and shared power and pride that comes with that. That was very different for me. It was very different sort of coming into that space from an aspect where it was just about sort of my gender identity, which does feel different. And I think people forget that. I think people forget that all the time, that actually under that sort of umbrella, people can be under many different things. You can be trans and gay, and you can be intersex. bisexual or whatever. And so there's like a real strength in that. So I think, I don't know, there's it makes me think about that sort of that understanding of power when I'm with my people, as it were.
That collective power.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also there's elements of that, right, that I don't like as a statement. I don't think that's sort of like expressed in the most eloquent way. But I guess what I'm saying is that sort of that feeling of pride, as however we interpret that understanding of that, is something that gives us a great deal of strength, and that's why it's important. That's why it's vital. And it's why it's also important and vital that it isn't that when you've got people asking, well, why are we all in this together? Why is it all the same? Why do trans people need to be here as well as gay people? Well, that's why, because we are stronger in that setting, and because and we're not single issue people. So just sort of having that. I don't know, I'm rambling on a little bit about sort of nothing.
No,
but it made me think about that balance.
Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing. I could literally talk to you all day. I love hearing you talk, and I love hearing your passion and just your humanness as well, and the trials that come along with life. It's really important to acknowledge that there is just not, nothing exists in this excellent, wonderful space all the time. There is challenges in it as well. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and if you really want to help me out, I would love it if you could leave me a review and share my podcast with friends who you think would also enjoy it. This podcast was produced by Lexi at Digital Hero, and the music was created by Charlie at Walters Music Productions.